Hi, everyone. Today's video is going to be about the signs of narcissistic victim syndrome. I don't like that label. Let's just get that out there. But that is what you may have heard it demonstrated or discussed as. So narcissistic victim syndrome, it's a thing. You can Google it. This video is going to highlight some of the signs that you have experienced narcissistic victim syndrome. Perhaps you're still stuck in the victim mode and mentality, and I don't like that because then what else is connected to it is victim shaming. So it almost feels like that label is a victim shaming label. We're not going to get into that in this video, but we are going to go into signs, symptoms, habits, patterns, behaviors of people who may be identifying with, connecting with, or experiencing narcissistic victim syndrome. So let's just take a deep breath before we get into this video, because this is not a fun or easy topic. What is fun afterwards is going through the powerful transformational process to healing all of these inner emotional wounds, to healing from these past hurts, pains, and traumas without more medication, without more self-help books, and without more years and years and years and years and years of therapy. So inside the Transforming Past Pain to Present Power Soul Revival course, I wanted to highlight with you the different archetypes that you develop when you're in a narcissistic relationship, when you've experienced narcissistic victim syndrome. Those are, you become the gaslighter. You are gaslit and you become your own gaslighter. You begin to question, doubt, and distort your own reality because you doubt and you don't trust yourself. You don't trust others. So you become your own gaslighter, which is just a horrible place to be. But it's a place that you find yourself after you've been through narcissistic abuse and you're experiencing narcissistic victim syndrome. You also become the stuffer bottler. You stuff and bottle all of your emotions and feelings, and that leads to using food, alcohol, other substances to stuff and numb and disconnect from the feelings and the emotions that you don't want to feel from those past pains, traumas, and experiences. You become what I call the F me, the fake or the fraud, where you plaster a smile on your face and someone says, hey, how are you? And you, oh, everything is fine. And you just pretend. You live life pretending. You live life feeling like a fake and a fraud, and you're afraid to be figured out because perhaps on the outside, it seems like, wow, you're doing really well. Like you're handling all this very well. But on the inside, it feels like you're dying inside. It feels like you're riddled with anxiety, with panic, like you're about to fall apart at the seams any second, like you're barely holding on by a thread. Or perhaps you've taken on the superhero archetype, where you are the ultra independent one. That's a trauma response, and it's deeply rooted in fear. It's based in fear because you fear letting other people in, receiving support. So you become this, I don't need anyone, I've got this, I can do it myself attitude. Thank you. Right. And the superhero archetype is very, very rewarded. There's another video that we can get into in more of all of these archetypes in more detail. But the last one I want to go over is the P me, what I call the perfectionist procrastinator. You develop this P me attitude, and it's also what I like to call poor me. And that goes hand in hand with the narcissistic victim syndrome, because it's poor me. And because of this poor me, you feel bad, right? For you, because of what you went through, you experience the P me, the perfectionist. Everything has to be perfect. And you almost develop OCD-like tendencies, habits, and behaviors and patterns, even though maybe you haven't been specifically diagnosed with OCD. Or on the other side of that coin is the not perfectionist, procrastinator, where you delay doing anything. You put everything off because of this symptoms of narcissistic victim syndrome. So we're going to get into some of those today. You can find more information in the description below this video. There will be very, very helpful links there, some freebies that I have for you guys to begin your journey to healing and revitalizing your broken, hurt, damaged, and lost soul after having been with a narcissist. So symptoms of narcissistic victim syndrome. Again, I don't like that word, but that's, what it relates to, are feelings of feeling isolated. So even though the most hurtful and painful thing that people can feel is isolated and alone, that is what you feel when you've experienced narcissistic victim syndrome. Even when you're in the relationship with a narcissist, you feel alone, but logically you're not alone. You're in this relationship, you're having interactions, engagements, exchanges with this person, but you feel alone, you feel isolated, even from the outside world, because no one else is in that relationship and having those experiences and processing them, digesting them the way that you are. And even when you try to convey with language, I always say language is limiting. So you try and tell people what you're experiencing. Oftentimes there's so much shame and guilt that you hold back, you reserve sharing about what you're truly and actually experiencing with them, because you don't want them to think less of you, which leads to all of those different archetypes I just talked about. You feel isolated. That's the number one sign of narcissistic victim syndrome. Your loved ones don't understand, and you don't tell them everything because they would probably kill you if they knew what was actually going on, or to the length or to the depth that things were actually occurring, and get so mad at you for staying, but not understand why you stayed. So you feel isolated, you feel alone, you reserve and hold back, really getting support because you think and hope that you can change this person. You can't change anyone other than yourself. And if you don't know where to begin, again, step by step, like the path is laid out for you that you need to take to begin your journey to deeply healing and revitalizing your lost soul. If you're experiencing narcissistic abuse, narcissistic victim syndrome. That's not an easy word to say. Try to say it 5 times fast. So when you're feeling isolated and alone, this only increases your vulnerability for further narcissistic manipulation, for the hoovering tactics and the ways that they are going to try to pull you back in when you try to get out. So the person abusing you may try to pull you back in with kindness, with understanding, with compassion, with apologies, and or this one blows my mind, by pretending the abuse never happened. Again, gaslighting you and getting you to question and distort your own reality. And then you become your own gaslighter. That's one of the archetypes of having experienced narcissistic victim syndrome. So there's a term called hoovering. And if you think about it like a Hoover vacuum, right, it sucks you back in. This works better when you lack support, when you haven't began your journey to healing your soul wounds, those inner, deep wounds after having been with a narcissist, or a number of them, or raised by them, right? Generally, people realize, I married one of my parents. So this isn't just isolated within the confines of this specific relationship. It's generally lifelong, connected to childhood wounds, pains, and past traumas. So you're more likely to doubt your perceptions of the abuse when you don't talk about it with anyone and you isolate yourself. And then you tend to use food or alcohol to numb those emotions that you feel when you're isolated, because no one likes to feel alone. And our mind will move us towards pleasure and away from pain. And sometimes we find pleasure in numbing, disassociating, and disconnecting. So we'll go to those external things that allow us to have that experience. So feeling isolated doesn't feel good, but that is one of the things that you will feel when you've experienced narcissistic victim syndrome. And even when or if your loved ones reach out to you, they don't know the depths of what you've experienced. So they don't know what to say. And oftentimes they're feeding and giving you advice, and advice never ever works. That's why so many modalities to healing are ineffective, because they're simply full of advice and it doesn't work. Advice does not aid in a true inner transformation or healing from those soul wounds. So you end up believing and gaslighting yourself into thinking maybe it wasn't that bad. And you don't want to tell those friends and family members how bad it is. So maybe you give them another chance because you just want to prove to yourself that you're not the fake, you're not the fraud, and that you're not all that bad, right? So then maybe you find yourself running back to the narcissistic relationship, all to prove to the people that are outside looking in that, see, you guys just had like a little bump in the road. You were able to work it out. But it doesn't end like that with a narcissist. That they, in order for any relationship to thrive, both parties need to be fully invested and in. The narcissist perceives to be in, but they're only in to continue to get supply from you. They're not actually in. That's why when the relationship ends, you feel crushed and devastated, because you realize the whole thing was a front, the whole thing was fake, the whole thing was fraudulent, and you were a part of that. So there's a part of you that also feels fake, fraudulent, and a failure. So this may lead to the next experience of narcissistic victim syndrome, which is you freeze. So fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Those are the 4 trauma responses. You freeze up. And even when you're out of the narcissistic relationship physically, even if you have to have exchanges or interactions or engagement with that person or other people that trigger you that are like that narcissist in any way, you may find that you freeze up. Everyone responds to trauma in different ways in different situations. There are going to be different responses to trauma, but the freeze response is one where you just are locked and frozen. So perhaps you go to retell the story and then you dissociate because it's too traumatic. Maybe you're in traditional talk therapy and the therapist is asking you to tell them, or EMDR, and you're trying to consciously go back to a traumatic experience. Your trauma responses are going to kick in. One of them may be that you completely freeze. And then the pain with that as you become frozen in that traumatic experience. So I really, really, really highly encourage you to do your research when you are seeking the most effective modality of therapy for you. I personally have trained in rapid transformational therapy and gone up to master's level of different styles of hypnosis. Those are the most powerful and profound modalities of therapy that I have found personally for myself and the clients that I've taken through this journey, because you utilize the power of your unconscious mind without consciously having to go back to the traumatic experience itself. So if you've tried regular talk therapy, if you've tried EMDR and they haven't worked for you, or they've made things worse or re-triggered, re-traumatized you, and now you feel frozen and stuck in that traumatic experience and you're replaying it, reliving it over and over and again every day, I would love to connect with you. I'd love to see if we're a good fit to work together one-to-one, and invite you to go through our soul revival transformation course that we have. So if you're still stuck in that, the narcissistic victim syndrome, and you're frozen in it, what generally happens is that you feel helpless, you feel powerless. It often involves disassociation, since emotionally distancing yourself from the abuse can decrease this intensity. One of the things that your mind says is effective for you is to just numb out the pain and distress that you experience. That's where the stuffer bottler archetype comes into play. It puts you right into that, we can't deal with this right now. Let's numb out, let's disconnect, let's dissociate, let's stuff and bottle our feelings so that we don't have to feel them. Inevitably, however, that makes you feel them even more intensely and even more regularly. So freezing can have some benefits in certain situations, but it doesn't help when you are frozen in the face of danger. So getting that out energetically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, removing it from your body, cutting the cord, completely releasing from it, getting you to that place where you can, if you need to, for any reason, I don't see why you would, go back and talk about the traumatic experiences, but no longer have an energetic or a physical response or connection to that experience. This is very helpful, particularly with people that I work with that are going through long drawn out court cases with the ex-narcissist. So that is one of the impacts of narcissistic victim syndrome. So we want to get you out of that frozen state or the fight state or the freeze, the fight, flight, freeze, and fawning state as quickly as possible by getting to a powerful and deep connection with your unconscious so that you can get out of this narcissistic victim syndrome space. Okay. Here's another sign of narcissistic victim syndrome. And this goes with the gaslighter archetype. This is what I was talking about in the beginning of the video. You were gaslit. Now you are the master gaslighter of yourself. You have difficulty and you have trouble making decisions. You've experienced a pattern of devaluation and criticism, which leaves you with very little self-esteem and confidence. It's absolutely drained, shattered, gone. If there's a percentage connected to it, it's like a 0.05% self-esteem, self-worth, self-confidence, self-trust, self-belief. And that leads to you having difficulty or feeling incapable or unable of making decisions for yourself. So this is the gaslighter archetype that I speak to, that I guide you through healing within. Because narcissistic manipulation often and almost always involves frequent implications that you don't know what you're doing, that you make bad decisions, that you can't make any decision or do anything right without them, that you can't do anything right at all, no matter what you do, no matter how long you spend doing it, no matter how much effort you put into doing it, it's always an epic and utter failure. So an abusive partner, parent, caregiver, teacher, whoever it was that you experienced that abuse from, will call you names. They will label you. They will belittle you. That's also in the program to release, remove, and disconnect from all the ways that we label ourselves after having experienced this type of abuse. So they'll say things like, I don't know what you do without me. I mean, where would you be? Who would you be without me? Thank God I'm in your life, right? Thank God that I'm here to do this for you because look at you. So you become your own gaslighter, and you have a difficult time making decisions because of that, because you hear that inner voice. That inner voice is actually yours. Perhaps externally at one time it was there, but now it's become yours. And your inner voice is like your worst nightmare. And it's what you hear when you're awake. It's what you hear when you're asleep. It's what you hear constantly. It's what leads to flashbacks, to nightmares, to, again, getting back and stuck into those trauma responses, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn. So over time, you absorb those insults and you attach them to your self-perception, to your self-identity. And as a result, you are constantly, continuously second guessing yourself as a result. So gaslighting tactics also make you doubt and debate your decision-making abilities. That's one of the archetypes. After you've been with a narcissist, you become your own gaslighter. And regardless of how long you were with them, if someone manipulates you into believing that you imagine things actually took place, you continuously doubt your perception of events. You see them, but you don't see them. You're there, but you're not there. And this certainly affects your ability to make decisions into the future. Well, there's really no such thing as future. There's just this present moment. But now, and in the now, if nothing changes, nothing changes. I always say that because it's so true. If nothing changes, nothing changes. If you are doubting your ability to make decisions now, that will happen again tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. So removing, releasing, and getting rid of the unconscious programming that was installed while you were being gaslit, that now has you gaslight yourself today, absolutely changes everything. So the next sign of narcissistic victim syndrome is that you always feel like you've done something wrong. And this types into the P me and the F me archetype. The P me, the perfectionist, and the procrastinator. When you always feel like you've done something wrong, you strive to make it perfect. And if it's not perfect, then you don't want to do it. And therefore you procrastinate doing it, or you do it and you live with this, oh, well, fake it till I make it, right? But you always make it, you create it, you give it away, right? Whether it's in work or in relationships, you do it, but you always analyze it and see all the things that could have been better, or the ways that you did it wrong and that it wasn't good enough. It didn't stack up. It didn't measure up. And that becomes part of your self-identity, that it's not enough. And I'm just, something is wrong with me. That becomes the story and the loop that plays in your mind and the lens that you live your life through. You always feel like you've done something wrong. So a key characteristic of narcissistic victim syndrome and narcissistic abuse is difficulty taking responsibility for any negative actions or harmful behaviors. The narcissist has a very difficult time taking any responsibility for negative actions and harmful behavior, and that gets projected onto you and thus becomes a part of who you are and how you live your life as well. So it feels like, I recently did a poll and asked, what is the number one thing that you feel like your soul experienced after being with a narcissist? One person said something that was so fascinating. It was, I feel like we exchanged souls. So this person had a very good, kind, compassionate, loving soul and took on the soul of the narcissist. That is very much what it feels like, because now, after having had that experience and being in the space of narcissistic victim syndrome, you have a difficult time taking responsibility for any negative actions or harmful behavior. And that's why many people report that they then feel like the narcissist. They question and wonder if they're the narcissist, because emotionally unavailable and abusive partners have a way to cast blame on others instead of accepting and being with that responsibility themselves. And they accomplish this through insisting that they have no recollection or no remembering of the experience or of what they did to you or what they said, of getting so angry that you, as the victim, end up soothing them and apologizing and agreeing to being wrong, even though in your soul knows that you were not wrong and that you didn't do anything to deserve that. But because the actions are not matching the words are, you're right, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, I agree. And you agree to being wrong, but your soul knows it wasn't wrong. See how there's that flip-flop that occurs. So that's what you experience. You always feel like you've done something wrong, even though you know you haven't. So all of these leave you with those particular archetypes, with being your own gaslighter, with stuffing and bottling those emotions. When you agree to doing something wrong, even though you know you didn't, you're left with resentment, with guilt, with anger, with rage, with shame. And it does not feel good to be left with that, to feel that that's all you are. So then you stuff and bottle those emotions you're feeling. And then you get to work the next day and you fake that everything is good and peachy and rosy at home, even though it's not. And all you ruminate about is how to change this, how to fix it, how to get out of it. Yet you feel so stuck in it because it's become a part of your experience within your own soul and self. That's the level of abuse that this kind of damage and experience in relationship does. So it leads to the next sign of narcissistic victim syndrome, was unexplained physical symptoms. There's always an explanation, but to someone experiencing narcissistic victim syndrome, these physical symptoms seemed unexplained. I used to break out in massive raised hives around the areas that last narcissist wanted and used the most. And I've heard this time and time again with people that I've worked with. And even now they're so deeply tuned into their bodies are healed from that. So now when those physical symptoms emerge and arise, they know exactly what it means and what to do. But some of the changes in the physical symptoms that you may notice are connected to triggers, are connected to these nervous feelings that lead to these physical symptoms. So triggers or teachers, listen to that. When you start to experience these physical symptoms, know that there's soul and deep healing that needs to occur at the unconscious level. So some of these things that you might notice are appetite changes. And this is in the stuffer bottler archetype. We dive into that, reconnecting with your body, regenerating, restoring your body, the cells within your body, because your appetite will change. You'll either lose all desire to eat, which is connected to losing the desire and will to live, or completely stuff and emotionally eat and drink. That's the stuffer bottler archetype. So you'll experience appetite changes, upset stomach, and nausea, because that's where the gut is, and the gut is where the intuition is housed, and you're either not listening to it, and it's going to increase the way that it gets your attention. So upset stomach or nausea, you start to feel physically sick and vomiting, like just physical symptoms of sickness. Going to bed, being able to sleep for an absurd number of hours. Past clients that I worked with said prior to connecting, they were sleeping 12 to 14 hours because it's a way that they can shut their body down and shut their emotions down so they don't have to physically deal with them and experience them. So differences in your sleeping habits and patterns, insomnia, fatigue, muscle aches and pains, your muscle will just get so tense. I've done another video on that. It's called muscle armoring, because your body is physically armored and prepared, and it's stuck, frozen in that fight response. So all of the muscles around your neck, around your back, and your hands would just be clenched and tightened. So that's one of the physical experiences and symptoms that you'll notice when you're going through narcissistic victim syndrome. Other gastrointestinal distresses, I mean, Hashimoto's, Lyme disease, there's so many that have been connected to this, thyroid, IBS, all of those things that are related to your gut, body, and physical symptoms and experiences, and often show up as disease. We talked about hives in the beginning of this. So using alcohol or other substances can sometimes feel like a helpful way to manage these symptoms, especially insomnia. That's the stuffer bottler archetype. But as a result, you almost always, I did, and so many people that I worked with in the past, end up consuming more than you would like in an effort to manage unwanted feelings and physical distress. So you may just tell yourself, I'm just going to have a glass of wine to just take the edge off. And then before you know it, it's a bottle of wine. And that cycle gets repeated nightly or daily. So Again, stuff or bottle or archetype, we go through healing all that in the program. The next sign of narcissistic victim syndrome is feeling restless and feeling unsettled. So narcissistic abuse, because it's so unpredictable, you're always on edge. You're always getting that feeling that you're walking on eggshells. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop. You may not know whether they're going to show up and wine and dine you, take you out to dinner, love you, profusely apologize for the ways that they've hurt you, or whether they're World War III is going to walk through the door when they come home, right? So because you never know what state they're going to be in, you never know what you're going to experience. Again, you get stuck in the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn trauma response mode and method. You never know what they're going to say or do at any given moment. You develop tension from needing to regularly prepare yourself to face that conflict. And then that conflict begins to be developed internally. You internally process that conflict. So your mind is stuck in a state of worry, a state of fear, a state of panic and anxiety about the constant stream of criticism or the unknown. What's going to happen? What am I going to expect? What am I going to experience with this person? Even when you're out of the relationship, that was so programmed into you while you were in the relationship. You can be out now and still be experiencing those same symptoms, those same bodily sensations, thoughts, and feelings when you're out as if you were in. So you can feel like you're slightly getting better, but without removing and rewiring the unconscious programming that was installed through that experience, you're only going to ever feel slightly better. And this leads to the next sign of narcissistic victim syndrome, where you don't recognize yourself. We go through this mirror work and through this transformation as part of the program. So I invite you again to take a look at that and see if it's a good fit for you. But if you're at that place where you don't recognize yourself, you cannot even look at yourself in the mirror, because who you see staring back at you is just this ugly, disgusting, nasty human. You begin to berate and put yourself down of all the weight that you've gained, or how tired you look, or how exhausted, how homely, how disgusting you look. You see yourself in pictures and you don't even know who you're looking at. It's hard to identify or point yourself out in a picture, because that's not the real you. That outer image of you that you're seeing is not a reflection of the true inner you. So it's about bringing that inner self out, restoring, rejuvenating, bringing that inner light out that now feels like it's lost in the darkness, so that you can not only recognize yourself, but absolutely lovingly embrace yourself and the person that you are after having been through that experience. But when facing abuse, most people eventually adjust their identity to accommodate the abusive partner. They become a chameleon, and they become who that person wants them to be, but they're never satisfied with that. And it's always, the target is always moving and always changing. The goalposts are changing. So you never know who you need to become and who you need to be, because then suddenly they're into someone and something else. So then you become like that, so that they will like you, love you, and accept you, and you'll feel whole and complete. And you're always left feeling empty, deflated, and depleted. So say your partner is, I don't know, into blondes, right? And you're a brunette. You go out and dye your hair blonde, and then suddenly they say they hate it. You chop it short, and then suddenly they like long hair. Whatever it is, you become someone that you don't recognize, and you go through all these archetypes. You start to gaslight yourself. You start to put on weight or significantly lose weight, and then they tell you, "Oh, I like people that are and got bigger butts than you, and you're pancake butt." Whatever it is, the story that they say and they make up. You go through all those archetypes because your identity is all around accommodating their needs, their wants, their likes, their desires. So you lose sight and lose connection with your genuine, true, authentic self. And this leads to, right, the next narcissistic victim syndrome is boundaries. There are no boundaries with a narcissist, because they have always benefited from you never having any. So it is very, very difficult to establish boundaries in a relationship where there has been benefits to not having any. So you'll find it's very difficult to establish boundaries with a narcissist, because this is someone who's taken advantage of walking over your boundaries and you moving the goalpost and the line of those boundaries to accommodate them, thus losing yourself in the identity of them. So with a person like that, when you try to enforce or set limits, they're going to change them, or they're not going to ignore them. They're going to give you the silent treatment. They're going to stonewall you. They're going to gaslight you. They're going to hoover you back in later. and get you to the point where you just eventually give up on your boundaries entirely because they're so damn hard to set and you don't know how because they're so inconsistent, because that person is so inconsistent and so off the wall with this. So that is why it's so important to get out of the relationship with them, learn how to set these boundaries. I do have another program called Boundary Blessers, ways to set boundaries without saying no, because that's generally the number one fear, is saying no, because that leads to rejection, it leads to anger, it leads to argument with those types of people. So if you're interested in that, I think there's a link in the comments to that as well. So all of these things lead to experiencing anxiety, experiencing depression. And I just, again, I caution you, if you are someone who is figuring out or hoping to figure out how to truly heal from these deep, dark emotional wounds and restore your soul, revitalize your life so that you come out through the end of that tunnel better than you've ever been, and you're going through the traditional methods around and you're simply getting people throwing prescriptions in your face or having you talk about it and re-traumatize you, the two biggest things that show up as a result of narcissistic victim syndrome are anxiety and depression. So because you've experienced CPTSD, it was complex, it was continuous, it was chaotic, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's not just a military term. That is a term for people who've gone through narcissistic abuse as well. So I highly caution you to just going and getting a prescription or re-traumatizing yourself and just getting a Band-Aid and making it even worse. So when you are in that place and you identify that you have experienced narcissistic victim syndrome, and now you're looking for a holistic, helpful, powerful way out, a way to transform, a way to transcend your life, and are not looking for it to take another 5 years or have to go to people and retell the story, I would love to connect with you. There's so many links in the description below this video, and we'll go through exactly what we talked about with all those different archetypes that you're now stuck in, and truly transforming from this narcissistic victim syndrome and get you out, not only to a place where you're surviving, but now to a place where you're thriving after having experienced that. All right, guys, that is enough. You're probably sick of me talking. That's okay for today, but I encourage you to use the description links in there, and look forward to connecting with you again very soon. Be well and take care until next time.